Welcome, warriors and shield maidens, to VK Tales, your Skald, ready to take you on epic journeys through the icy fjords and blood-soaked battlefields of the Viking world. Before we begin, raise your mead horns and swear loyalty to our clan. Subscribe to the channel, tell us in the comments which village you're watching from, and raise your thumbs as a sign of approval to the gods, and click the like button. Now settle in close to the fire, because the great hall of Iron Peak buzzed with merriment, the air thick with the scent of roasted meat and spilled mead. I, Freya, stood near the back, nursing a horn of ale and watching the revelers with a mixture of amusement and mild disdain. These feasts always brought out the worst in some of our warriors, but it was a necessary evil to keep morale high. Our leader, Rurik the Unyielding, sat at the head of the long table, his beard glistening with grease, as he tore into a leg of mutton. His booming laugh echoed through the hall, drowning out the din of conversation for a moment. "Freya," he called out, waving me over. "Why do you lurk in the shadows? Come, join us at the high table." I forced a smile and made my way through the crowd, nodding to familiar faces as I passed. As I approached, Rurik's son, Bjorn, shot me a look of barely concealed contempt. He had never approved of his father's trust in me, a mere healer. "My lord," I said, bowing my head slightly as I took the offered seat. "I trust the feast is to your liking?" Rurik grinned, his teeth stained red with wine. "It is magnificent, a feast worthy of the gods themselves. But tell me, Freya, what news from the borders? Have your herbs revealed any omens?" I opened my mouth to respond, but Bjorn cut in. "Father, surely you jest. Freya's herbs and potions are mere trickery, not the stuff of true Viking warriors." Rurik's eyes narrowed. "Mind your tongue, boy. Freya's wisdom has saved more lives than your sword ever will." The tension at the table was palpable. I cleared my throat, hoping to diffuse the situation. "My lord, the signs have been unsettling. The ravens speak of shadows moving in the east, and the sacred grove whispers of—" Suddenly, Rurik's face contorted in pain. He clutched at his throat, his eyes wide with panic. The horn of mead slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor. "Father!" Bjorn cried out, leaping to his feet. I watched in horror as Rurik collapsed, his massive frame toppling backwards. Foam bubbled from his lips, and his limbs began to twitch violently. For a heartbeat, the hall fell silent. Then chaos erupted. Warriors surged forward, shouting and pushing. Women screamed. Children wailed. I shoved my way through the panicked crowd, my mind racing. This was no ordinary illness. The symptoms were too sudden, too severe. "Make way!" I shouted, my voice carrying over the din. "I need space!" As I reached Rurik's convulsing form, I dropped to my knees beside him. His face had taken on a sickly pallor, and his eyes rolled back in his head. I pressed my fingers to his neck, feeling his pulse racing erratically. "Poison," I muttered, my blood running cold. "By the gods, he's been poisoned." Bjorn loomed over me, his face a mask of fury and fear. "What did you say, witch? What have you done to my father?" I ignored him, focusing on Rurik. I pried open his mouth, checking his tongue and gums. The faint smell of bitter almonds confirmed my worst fears. "Someone, bring me my satchel," I called out, "quickly." As a young warrior ran to fetch my supplies, I turned to address the crowd. The room fell silent, all eyes upon me. "Listen carefully," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gripping my heart. "Our chief has been poisoned. I need everyone to remain calm and do exactly as I say." Murmurs of shock and disbelief rippled through the hall. Accusations began to fly. It was the outsiders. No, it must be a rival clan. The gods have forsaken us. "Silence!" Bjorn roared, his hand on the hilt of his sword. He turned to me, his eyes blazing. "Freya, if this is your doing, I swear by Odin's beard—" "Enough!" I snapped, surprising even myself with the authority in my voice. "Every moment we waste brings Rurik closer to death. I need water, clean linens, and for everyone to step back and give me space to work." As the crowd reluctantly complied, I began to examine Rurik more closely. His breathing was shallow and ragged, his skin clammy to the touch. I mixed a concoction of herbs to induce vomiting, hoping to purge some of the poison from his system. As I worked, I spoke softly to Rurik, hoping some part of him could still hear me. "Stay with us, my lord. Fight this. Your people need you." Hours passed in a blur of feverish activity. I did everything in my power to stabilize Rurik's condition, but I knew it was only a temporary measure. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows of the great hall, I finally stood, my back aching and my hands stained with herbs and bile. The remaining crowd looked at me expectantly, hope and fear warring in their eyes. Bjorn stepped forward, his earlier anger replaced by a desperate plea. "Well?" he demanded. "Will he live?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I've managed to slow the poison's progress, but I won't lie to you. The situation is dire. We have mere days to find an antidote, or we will lose him." A collective gasp went up from the assembled Vikings. Bjorn's face hardened. "Then what are you waiting for? Find this antidote." I shook my head. "It's not that simple. This poison, I've never seen its like before. Creating an antidote will require ingredients I don't have, knowledge I don't possess. I'll need to journey into the dark forest, seek out ancient wisdom and face the gods know what dangers." An older warrior, his beard streaked with gray, spoke up. "But who will tend to Rurik while you're gone? And how can we trust that you'll return?" I met his gaze steadily. "I've trained my apprentices well. They'll care for him in my absence. As for trust..." I turned, addressing the entire hall. "I swear upon my life and my soul that I will do everything in my power to save our chief. But know this, the journey ahead is perilous and time is not on our side. While I'm gone, you must be vigilant, for the poison that felled Rurik didn't appear by magic. There is a traitor among us." The hall erupted in angry shouts and fearful whispers. Accusations flew once more, friend turning against friend in an instant. I raised my voice above the din. "This is exactly what our enemies want. Division and chaos. We must stand united if we hope to survive this crisis. Guard Rurik, watch each other, and pray to the gods for guidance." As the crowd slowly dispersed, I began gathering supplies for my journey. Bjorn approached me, his earlier hostility tempered by a grudging respect. "Freya," he said quietly, I may have misjudged you. Bring back this cure. Save my father. Do this, and I swear I'll never doubt you again." I nodded solemnly. "I'll do everything in my power, Bjorn. But remember what I said. Trust no one completely. The traitor could be anyone." With those ominous words hanging in the air, I shouldered my pack and stepped out into the cool morning air. The dark forest loomed before me, its shadows hiding untold dangers and hopefully the key to Rurik's salvation. As I took my first steps on this perilous journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing in Iron Peak would ever be the same again. The ancient trees loomed before me, their gnarled branches reaching out like grasping fingers. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. The weight of my pack pressed against my shoulders, a constant reminder of the urgency of my quest. "By Odin's wisdom, guide my steps," I murmured, touching the runestone hanging from my neck. With one last glance back at the village of Iron Peak, now hidden behind the morning mist, I stepped into the shadows of the forest. The change was immediate and unsettling. The cheerful birdsong that had accompanied my departure faded away, replaced by an oppressive silence. My heart pounded with each crunch of leaves beneath my feet. Every snapping twig made me flinch, my nerves already frayed from the events of the previous night. The image of Rurik convulsing on the floor of the great hall was seared into my mind, driving me forward despite my fear. As I pushed deeper into the forest, the canopy above grew thicker, blocking out more and more of the sunlight. The air became heavy and damp, filling my lungs with the scent of decay and something else. Something ancient and unknowable. "Focus, Freya," I chided myself. "Rurik is counting on you. They're all counting on you." I pulled out a crude map I had hastily drawn before leaving. According to the village elders, there was an old crone who lived deep in these woods, a woman said to possess knowledge of poisons and cures long forgotten by mortal men. Finding her was my best hope of saving Rurik. As I studied the map, a twig snapped loudly behind me. I whirled around, my hand instinctively reaching for the dagger at my hip. Nothing but shadows greeted my eyes. "Hello," I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. "Is someone there?" Only the faint rustle of leaves answered me. Shaking off my paranoia, I turned back to the path only to find it gone. Where there had been a clear trail moments before, there was now only a tangle of roots and undergrowth. "Impossible," I whispered, my blood running cold. A low chuckle echoed through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Nothing is impossible in these woods, little healer," a raspy voice said, "especially for those who enter uninvited." I spun in a circle, trying to locate the source of the voice. "Show yourself," I demanded, my voice far braver than I felt. Now, the voice chided. "Is that any way to address your host? You're in my domain now, Freya of Iron Peak. The question is, why?" My mind raced. Could this be the crone I was seeking? Or something far more dangerous? "I seek knowledge," I said carefully. "A great leader has been poisoned, and I must find a cure." Another chuckle, closer this time. "Knowledge always comes with a price, child. Are you prepared to pay it?" Before I could respond, a thick mist began to roll in, obscuring the forest floor. It swirled around my feet, climbing higher with unnatural speed. "Wait," I cried out. "Please, I need your help." But the voice had gone silent. The mist continued to rise, and soon I could barely see my hand in front of my face. Panic clawed at my throat as I stumbled blindly through the fog. "Think, Freya, think," I muttered. "There must be a way out of this." As if in response to my thoughts, a faint glow appeared in the distance. With no better option, I moved towards it, my hands outstretched to avoid colliding with trees. The glow grew stronger as I approached, and suddenly I found myself in a small clearing. The mist parted, revealing a sight that took my breath away. The entire clearing was filled with mushrooms, each one pulsing with an ethereal blue light. "Beautiful," I breathed, momentarily forgetting my fear. I knelt down to examine one of the mushrooms more closely. Its cap was dotted with tiny, swirling patterns that seemed to move as I watched. As a healer, I had studied many plants and fungi, but I had never seen anything like this. "Ah, you've found my little garden," the raspy voice said, startling me. "Magnificent, aren't they?" I stood quickly, turning to face the speaker. An ancient woman stood at the edge of the clearing, her body bent and gnarled like the trees surrounding us. Her eyes, however, were sharp and clear, fixing me with an penetrating gaze. "Are you the one I seek?" I asked. "The wise woman who knows of poisons and cures?" The crone cackled, the sound sending shivers down my spine. "I am many things to many people, child. Wise woman, witch, savior, destroyer. It all depends on who's asking." I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. "I am Freya, healer of Iron Peak. Our chief, Rurik the Unyielding, has been poisoned by a traitor. I seek a cure to save his life and our village." The old woman's eyes narrowed. "And why should I help you? What do the petty squabbles of men matter to me?" "Because," I said, thinking quickly, "if Rurik dies, war will follow. The delicate balance of power will be shattered. The forests you call home may burn in the conflicts to come." The crone was silent for a long moment, considering my words. Finally, she nodded. "Clever girl. Very well. I will help you. For a price." I steeled myself. "Name it. 3 tasks you must complete," she said, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality. 3 trials to prove your worth. Complete them, and I'll give you what you seek." "And if I fail?" I asked, already knowing the answer. The crone's smile was anything but reassuring. "Then your bones will join the many others that fertilize my garden. Do you accept?" I thought of Rurik, of the village depending on me. I had no choice. I accept. Excellent, the old woman cackled. Your first task begins now. Bring me 3 of the glowing mushrooms you see before you. I frowned. That's it? Just pick 3 mushrooms? The crone's smile widened, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. Oh yes, little healer. Just 3 mushrooms. But choose carefully. Some bring knowledge and power. Others bring only madness and death. And be quick about it. Time grows short for your precious chief, doesn't it? With that ominous warning, she vanished into the mist, leaving me alone in the clearing. I turned back to the sea of glowing fungi, my earlier appreciation for their beauty now tinged with fear. Right, I muttered. Just pick 3 mushrooms. How hard can it be? As if in answer, a low growl emanated from the shadows beyond the clearing. Something large was moving out there, hidden by the mist and darkness. My hand trembling, I reached for the first mushroom. As my fingers brushed its glowing cap, visions flashed before my eyes. Great battles, seas of blood, the clash of sword against shield. I jerked my hand back with a gasp. The growling grew louder. Focus, Freya, I whispered. Rurik is counting on you. They're all counting on you. I reached for another mushroom, praying to every god I knew that I was making the right choice. As I plucked it from the ground, I could have sworn I heard the old crone's laughter echoing through the trees. The shadows at the edge of the clearing shifted, and I caught a glimpse of gleaming teeth and glowing eyes. Whatever was out there, it was getting closer. With my heart pounding in my ears, I grabbed 2 more mushrooms in quick succession. Visions assaulted me, some wondrous, others horrifying, but I forced myself to hold on. I have them, I shouted. I've completed your task. The growling suddenly stopped. The mist began to dissipate, and I found myself once again in the dense forest, the glowing clearing nowhere to be seen. In my hand, I clutched 3 ordinary-looking mushrooms. Well done, little healer, the crone's voice whispered on the wind. Rest now. Your next trial awaits with the rising sun. Exhausted and shaken, I slumped against a tree. As my eyes drifted closed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of my ordeal. Somewhere in the distance, a raven cawed, its cry sounding ominously like mocking laughter. The first light of dawn filtered through the dense canopy, rousing me from a fitful sleep. My body ached from spending the night propped against a gnarled tree, and the events of the previous day felt like a fever dream. But the 3 mushrooms clutched in my hand were undeniable proof of the ordeal I'd endured. 1 task down, I muttered, stretching my stiff limbs. Gods know how many more to go. As if summoned by my words, the old crone's raspy voice drifted on the morning breeze. Awake at last, little healer. Your next trial awaits. Follow the path of bones, and you'll find what you seek. I peered through the trees, my heart sinking as I spotted a trail of bleached animal bones leading deeper into the forest. With a resigned sigh, I shouldered my pack and set off, each step crunching ominously beneath my feet. The path twisted and turned, leading me through parts of the forest that seemed to defy nature itself. Trees grew at impossible angles, their branches intertwining to form grotesque shapes. More than once, I could have sworn I saw faces peering at me from knots in the bark, their expressions flickering between anguish and malicious glee. After what felt like hours of walking, the bone path ended abruptly at the edge of a small clearing. In the center stood a decrepit hut, its thatched roof sagging and its walls covered in a patchwork of moss and fungi. A pungent odor hung in the air, a mixture of decay and something sickeningly sweet. Hello? I called out, my voice quavering. Is anyone there? Silence was my only answer. Swallowing hard, I approached the hut, the stench growing stronger with each step. As I reached for the door, a cold voice froze me in my tracks. Who dares disturb the witch of the Whispering Woods? I turned slowly, coming face to face with an ancient crone. Her skin was as pale as moonlight, stretched taut over prominent bones. But it was her eyes that truly terrified me. milky white and unseeing, yet somehow fixed directly on me. I am Freya of Iron Peak, I stammered. I seek your wisdom to save my chief. The witch's thin lips curved into a cruel smile. Ah, yes. The poison runs deep in his veins, does it not? Tick-tock, little healer. Time is running out. Please, I begged. If you know of a cure, I'll do anything. Anything? The witch interrupted, her unseeing eyes seeming to bore into my soul. Be careful what you promise in these woods, child. Some prices are too steep, even for a chief's life. I squared my shoulders, forcing steel into my voice. Name your price. I've come too far to turn back now. The witch cackled, the sound sending shivers down my spine. Very well. Enter my humble abode, and we shall discuss terms. She turned and entered the hut, leaving me little choice but to follow. The interior was a cluttered mess of herbs, bones, and bubbling cauldrons. Strange symbols were carved into every available surface, and the air was thick with incense smoke. Now then, the witch said, settling into a chair made of twisted branches. You seek an antidote for a most unusual poison, one that burns like fire in the veins and turns the mind against itself. I nodded, hope flaring in my chest. You know of it? Oh yes, she replied, her unseeing eyes gleaming. I know many things. The question is, what are you willing to give up to save your precious chief? I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. What do you want? The witch's smile widened, revealing rows of sharp, blackened teeth. A year of your life, freely given. Not from the end, mind you, but from this very moment. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? Exactly what I said, child. Give me a year of your life force and I'll provide the cure you seek. You'll age a year in an instant, your body and mind fast-forwarding through time. I staggered back, my mind reeling. But that's impossible. The witch cackled again. Impossible? In these woods, the impossible is merely improbable. Make your choice, healer. A year of your life, or your chief's death on your conscience. Images flashed through my mind. Rurik convulsing on the floor, Bjorn's accusing glare, the villagers looking to me with desperate hope. I thought of the perilous journey I'd undertaken, the trials I'd already faced. Could I really turn back now? If I agree, I said slowly, you swear you'll give me the cure? The witch nodded solemnly. You have my word, bound by powers older than these ancient trees. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Then I accept. A year of my life for the antidote. A wicked grin split the witch's face. Excellent. Your sacrifice is accepted. Before I could react, she lunged forward with surprising speed, pressing her palm against my forehead. Pain exploded behind my eyes, and I felt as if I were being torn apart and reassembled. Memories flashed by in a blur. Seasons changing, wounds healing, knowledge accumulating. When it was over, I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. It is done, the witch said, her voice oddly gentle. Rise, Freya of Iron Peak, and see yourself anew. Shakily, I got to my feet and caught a glimpse of my reflection in a polished copper bowl. My face was subtly different. A few more lines around the eyes, a strand of gray in my hair. But it was my eyes that had changed the most, holding a wisdom and weariness that hadn't been there before. The cure, I rasped, my voice hoarse. You promised. Peace, child, the witch interrupted. I keep my bargains. She shuffled to a cluttered workbench and began mixing ingredients with practiced ease. Tell me, how does it feel to be a year older in the blink of an eye? I considered the question, probing my memories and emotions. Strange, I admitted. I feel different. Older, yes, but also more aware, the witch supplied. More in tune with the hidden currents of the world? I nodded, surprised. Yes, exactly. How did you know? The witch's unseeing eyes seemed to twinkle. The year I took wasn't just time, little healer. It was experience, knowledge, growth. You've gained more than you've lost. though you may not realize it yet. She turned back to her work, adding a pinch of something that smoked and sizzled. Now, listen carefully. This antidote will cure the poison in your chief's veins, but it's only part of the solution. What do you mean? I asked, a sense of dread creeping over me. The poison that felled your chief is no ordinary toxin, the witch explained. It's an ancient evil, one that corrupts both body and spirit. To truly cure him, you must not only heal his body but cleanse his soul. I frowned, confused. How am I supposed to do that? The witch handed me a small vial filled with a swirling, opalescent liquid. This will heal the physical damage. For the rest... She paused, her unseeing eyes seeming to look right through me. You must find the source of the corruption and destroy it. The traitor in your midst is merely a symptom of a greater darkness. But how will I know? You'll know, she interrupted. Trust in the wisdom you've gained. Your path forward will reveal itself when the time is right. I clutched the vial, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on my shoulders. Thank you, I said softly. For everything. The witch's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. You've paid a hefty price, Freya of Iron Peak. Use what you've gained wisely. She waved a gnarled hand towards the door. Now go. Your chief's time grows short, and your journey is far from over. As I turned to leave, the witch called out one last time. Remember, child, in these woods, nothing is as it seems. Trust your instincts, and beware the shadows that lurk in the hearts of men. With those ominous words ringing in my ears, I stepped out of the hut and back into the forest. The trees seemed to loom closer, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers, but I stood taller now, my newfound wisdom lending me strength. Hold on, Rurik, I whispered, clutching the precious vial. I'm coming. As I set off through the twisted woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that my trials were only beginning. The witch's warning echoed in my mind, and I found myself wondering just what darkness awaited me back in Iron Peak. With each step, I felt the weight of my sacrificed year, a constant reminder of the price of knowledge and the burden of responsibility. The forest seemed to shift around me, the path ahead unclear. But I pressed on, driven by duty, compassion, and the faintest glimmer of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them, for Rurik, for Iron Peak, and for the future that hung in the balance. The familiar silhouette of Iron Peak loomed before me as I emerged from the dark forest, the precious vial of antidote clutched tightly in my hand. Exhaustion weighed heavily on my bones, a testament to the physical and emotional toll of my journey. But there was no time to rest. Rurik's life hung in the balance. As I approached the village gates, I was struck by an eerie silence. No children played in the streets, no smoke rose from the forges. It was as if a pall had settled over Iron Peak in my absence. Ho there, I called out to the guards. Open the gates, I've returned with the cure. The gates creaked open slowly, revealing faces etched with worry and suspicion. Whispers followed me as I made my way through the village, the weight of their stares almost palpable. Is that really Freya? She looks different. Can we trust her? I quickened my pace, heading for the great hall where I knew Rurik would be. As I pushed open the heavy wooden doors, I was met with a scene of chaos. Warriors argued loudly, their faces red with anger. Women huddled in corners, comforting crying children, and in the center of it all stood Bjorn, Rurik's son, his eyes wild with a mixture of grief and rage. Freya, he bellowed, spotting me. Where in hell's name have you been? I held up the vial, its contents shimmering in the torchlight. I have the cure, Bjorn. Take me to your father. Bjorn's eyes narrowed, suspicion clear in his gaze. Not so fast, witch. Much has happened in your absence. A knot of dread formed in my stomach. What do you mean? Is Rurik... My father lives, Bjorn interrupted, but only just. While you were gone, more fell ill. The poison spreads, Freya, and some say you're to blame. I recoiled as if struck. That's madness. I've risked everything to find this cure. Have you? Bjorn challenged, stepping closer. Or did you flee, leaving us to suffer while you conspired with our enemies? The accusation stung, but I forced myself to remain calm. Bjorn, listen to me. The poison that felled Rurik is no ordinary toxin. It's an ancient evil, one that corrupts both body and spirit. We must act quickly if we're to save him, to save all of Iron Peak. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others scoffed at my words. Bjorn's face was a mask of conflicting emotions. Prove it, he said finally. Prove that this cure of yours isn't just another poison. I hesitated, knowing the risk, but seeing no alternative. Very well. Bring me some of the poisoned water. I'll demonstrate its effects and the power of the antidote. Bjorn barked orders, and soon a cup of tainted water was brought forth. The crowd watched in tense silence as I poured a few drops into the cup, then added a single drop of the antidote. The water hissed and bubbled, then cleared completely. You see, I said, holding up the cup. The antidote neutralizes the poison completely. To drive my point home, I raised the cup to my lips and took a small sip. A collective gasp went up from the onlookers. For a moment nothing happened. Then a wave of dizziness washed over me. I staggered, nearly dropping the vial of antidote. Freya! A voice cried out. Inga, one of my apprentices. She rushed to my side, supporting me as I swayed. I'm all right, I managed, though my vision swam. The poison, it's powerful, but the antidote is working. I can feel it. Bjorn's expression softened slightly. Perhaps we were too hasty in our judgment. But before he could say more, a scream pierced the air. We all turned to see a young woman collapse, foam bubbling from her lips, another victim of the poison. Chaos erupted once more. In the confusion, I felt a hand close around my wrist, pulling me away from the crowd. It was Inga, her eyes wide with fear. Freya, we must go, she hissed. It's not safe here. But Rurik, I protested. Is stable for now? Inga interrupted. But there are those who would see you dead before you can administer the cure. We need to regroup, to plan our next move. Reluctantly, I allowed her to lead me out of the great hall and through winding back alleys. We ended up at my hut, a small structure on the outskirts of the village. Once inside, Inga barred the door and drew the shutters. Now, she said, turning to me with a grim expression, tell me everything. I sank onto a chair, the events of the past days crashing over me like a wave. I told Inga of my journey into the dark forest, of the trials I'd faced, and the witch's warning. As I spoke, I could see the shock and disbelief play across her face. By the gods, Freya, she breathed when I'd finished. You've aged. How is that possible? I smiled wryly. In those woods, the impossible becomes merely improbable. But that's not important now. We need to figure out who's behind this poisoning and why. Inga nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. While you were gone, tensions in the village reached a breaking point. Old rivalries resurfaced, and new alliances were formed. It's as if the poison is affecting more than just people's bodies. The witch spoke of a corruption of the spirit, I mused. Perhaps this goes deeper than we realized. A sudden pounding on the door made us both jump. Bjorn's voice boomed from outside. Freya, open up, we need to talk. Inga and I exchanged worried glances. Should we let him in? She whispered. I hesitated, torn between trust and caution. But before I could decide, the sound of splintering wood filled the air. The door burst open, revealing Bjorn and a group of armed warriors. Seize them, Bjorn roared, the traitor and her accomplice. Bjorn, wait, I cried, raising my hands in a placating gesture. This is madness, we're on the same side. But Bjorn's eyes were wild, filled with a rage that seemed beyond reason. Lies, all lies. You'll not poison another soul, witch. As the warriors advanced, I felt a surge of the strange new power I'd gained from my ordeal in the forest. Time seemed to slow, and in that moment, I saw everything with startling clarity. The tension in Bjorn's jaw, the fear hidden behind his anger, the way some of the warriors hesitated, doubt clear in their eyes. And something else, a shadowy presence that seemed to hover at the edges of my vision, whispering words of discord and hate. "Inga," I said softly, not taking my eyes off Bjorn. "When I give the signal, run. Find those we can trust. The real enemy is still out there, and we must be ready." Inga nodded almost imperceptibly. I took a deep breath, centering myself for what was to come. "Bjorn," I said, my voice carrying a new authority that seemed to give him pause. "You're making a terrible mistake. The poison that plagues Iron Peak is more than just a toxin. It's a corruption of the spirit. And right now, it's working its evil through you." Bjorn faltered, confusion flickering across his face. What are you talking about?" I took a step forward, my gaze locked with his. "Think, Bjorn. This isn't you. The mistrust, the rage, these are symptoms of the poison's influence. Fight it." For a moment I thought I'd gotten through to him, but then his face hardened once more. "Enough of your tricks, men, take them." "Now!" I shouted to Inga. As she bolted for the back door, I unleashed a handful of herbs I'd palmed earlier, a mix that created a thick, acrid smoke when it hit the floor. Coughing and confusion filled the hut. I ducked and weaved through the chaos, my newfound instincts guiding me. As I slipped past Bjorn, I whispered in his ear, "I'll find the truth, Bjorn. For Rurik. For all of us." Then I was out in the night air, running as fast as my legs could carry me. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the clatter of weapons. But ahead lay uncertainty, and the chance to uncover the real threat to Iron Peak. As I disappeared into the shadows, the witch's words echoed in my mind. "Beware the shadows that lurk in the hearts of men." The true test, I realized, was just beginning. The pre-dawn air was crisp and biting as I crouched in the shadows of an abandoned barn on the outskirts of Iron Peak. My breath came in ragged gasps, my body still trembling from the narrow escape. The vial of antidote pressed against my chest, a constant reminder of the weight of my responsibility. "Freya!" a hushed voice called out. I tensed, ready to flee, but relaxed as Inga emerged from the darkness. "Thank the gods," I breathed. "Did anyone follow you?" Inga shook her head, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "No, I don't think so." "Freya, what's happening? Why has everyone turned against us?" I sighed, feeling the weight of my newfound years. "It's the poison, Inga. It's not just affecting their bodies, it's corrupting their minds, turning them against each other. Against us." A muffled cry from nearby caught our attention. We peered out of the barn to see a small group of villagers huddled around a prone figure. My healer's instincts took over, and before Inga could stop me, I was moving towards them. "Let me help," I called out, approaching cautiously. The villagers turned, fear and suspicion clear on their faces. One man, Gunnar, a farmer I'd known for years, stepped forward with a pitchfork in hand. "Stay back, witch," he snarled. "Haven't you done enough harm?" I raised my hands, trying to appear non-threatening. "Gunnar, please, I'm here to help. I have the cure." "Lies," a woman cried out. "She's come to finish what she started." The prone figure on the ground let out another moan, and I recognized her as Astrid, one of the village elders. Her skin had taken on a sickly green hue, and foam flecked her lips. "Listen to me," I said, my voice taking on the authority I'd gained from my ordeal. "That woman will die if we don't act now. Let me prove to you that I'm here to help." For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly, Gunnar lowered his pitchfork. "If you harm her..." "I won't," I promised, moving quickly to Astrid's side. As I knelt beside her, I could see the full extent of the poison's effects. Her veins stood out stark against her pale skin, pulsing with an unnatural green light. Her eyes rolled wildly, unfocused and filled with terror. "Hold her still," I instructed, uncorking the vial of antidote. With trembling hands, I administered a few drops of the precious liquid. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Astrid's body convulsed violently, her back arching off the ground. "What have you done?" Gunnar cried, raising his pitchfork once more. "Wait!" I held up a hand, my eyes fixed on Astrid. Slowly, the convulsions subsided, the sickly green tinge faded from her skin, and her breathing steadied. After what felt like an eternity, her eyes fluttered open, clear and focused. "Freya," she croaked. What happened?" A collective gasp went up from the gathered villagers. Gunnar dropped his pitchfork, falling to his knees beside Astrid. "It's a miracle," he whispered. I stood, addressing the awestruck crowd. "Not a miracle. Science, medicine. The poison that plagues our village can be cured, but we must act quickly. There's more at stake here than you realize." As if to emphasize my point, a commotion arose from the direction of the village center. The sound of shouting and clashing weapons filled the air. "What's happening?" Inga asked, fear creeping into her voice. I closed my eyes, reaching out with my newfound senses. The shadows at the edge of my vision writhed and pulsed, whispering of chaos and discord. "The poison spreads," I said grimly. "Not just in body, but in spirit. We need to get to Rurik. He's the key to all of this." Gunnar stepped forward, determination replacing the fear in his eyes. "We'll help you, Freya. What do you need us to do?" A plan began to form in my mind. Gather anyone who's still unaffected by the poison. We'll need all the help we can get. Inga, I need you to prepare more of the antidote. There's a patch of moonflowers near the sacred grove. They're a key ingredient. As the villagers dispersed to carry out their tasks, I turned my attention to the village center. The sounds of conflict were growing louder, more chaotic. "Freya," Astrid called out weakly. "Be careful. The poison, it shows you things. Terrible things. Truths you're not ready to face." I nodded solemnly, her words confirming my worst fears. "Rest now, Astrid. We'll need your wisdom before this is over." With Inga at my side, I made my way towards the heart of Iron Peak. The closer we got, the more evident the poison's effects became. Neighbors fought in the streets, their eyes wild with paranoia and rage. The air itself seemed thick with malevolence, and I could feel the corruption trying to seep into my own mind. "Stay close," I murmured to Inga. "And whatever happens, don't let the poison cloud your judgment." We reached the great hall, its massive doors hanging off their hinges. Inside, chaos reigned. Warriors clashed with each other, while others cowered in corners, muttering incoherently. And there, at the center of it all, stood Bjorn, his sword raised against his own father. "Bjorn," I called out, my voice cutting through the din. "Stop this madness." He turned, his eyes blazing with an unnatural fire. You did this to us." "No, Bjorn," I said, taking a step forward. "This isn't you. It's the poison, clouding your mind, turning you against those you love." For a moment, doubt flickered across his face. But then the shadows seemed to gather around him, whispering in his ear. "Lies!" he roared. "I see the truth now, witch. You've poisoned us all, turned us against each other. But no more." He lunged forward, his sword arcing towards me. I dodged, feeling the blade whistle past my ear. "Inga, the antidote," I cried out. My apprentice fumbled with the vial, her hands shaking. Bjorn turned his attention to her, his face contorted with rage. "I don't think so," he snarled, advancing on her. Time seemed to slow. I saw the fear in Inga's eyes, the madness in Bjorn's. And beyond them, I saw Rurik, slumped on his throne, his skin pale and his breathing shallow. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. "Bjorn," I shouted, "you want the truth? Here it is." I raised the vial to my lips and drank deeply of the antidote. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. My vision exploded with color and light, and I felt as if my very soul was being torn apart and reassembled. Images flashed before my eyes. The dark forest, the witch's hut, shadows writhing at the edges of reality. And through it all, a truth so terrible it threatened to break my mind. When the visions cleared, I found myself on my knees, gasping for breath. The great hall had fallen silent, all eyes fixed on me. The poison, I managed to croak. It's not just in our water, it's in our hearts, our fears, our doubts, our darkest impulses. The poison feeds on them, amplifies them. I struggled to my feet, meeting Bjorn's confused gaze. But we can fight it. We must fight it. For Iron Peak. For each other. Something shifted in Bjorn's eyes, a flicker of recognition of the man he truly was. Freya, But before he could finish, a low, menacing chuckle filled the air. We all turned to see Rurik rising from his throne, his movements jerky and unnatural. "Well done, little healer," he said, but the voice that emerged was not his own. It was ancient, dripping with malice. "You've uncovered the truth, but I'm afraid it's too late." As we watched in horror, Rurik's form seemed to ripple and change. The shadows gathered around him, coalescing into a monstrous shape that towered over us all. "The poison has taken root," the creature that was once Rurik hissed, "and Iron Peak will fall." I gripped the nearly empty vial of antidote, my mind racing. The true battle, I realized, was just beginning, and the fate of not just Iron Peak, but perhaps the entire world hung in the balance. "We'll see about that," I said, steel in my voice. "The night is darkest just before the dawn, and dawn is coming." As the monstrous form of Rurik loomed over us, I knew that everything I had endured, the journey through the dark forest, the witch's bargain, the betrayal and chaos, had led to this moment. Whatever came next would define not just my fate, but the fate of all those I had sworn to protect. The great hall of Iron Peak had become a battlefield. The monstrous form that was once Rurik towered over us, shadows writhing around it like living tendrils. Bjorn stood frozen, his sword hanging limply at his side as he stared at the thing his father had become. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I gripped the nearly empty vial of antidote, my mind racing. "Bjorn, listen to me. That thing isn't your father anymore. We need to fall back, regroup." The creature that was Rurik let out a bone-chilling laugh. "Run, little ones. Hide in your holes. The poison has taken root, and soon all of Iron Peak will be mine." As if to emphasize its point, more villagers burst into the hall, their eyes wild with madness, foam flecking their lips. We were quickly being surrounded. "Inga!" I called out. "The smoke bombs." My apprentice nodded, reaching into her satchel and pulling out several small clay spheres. With practiced precision, she hurled them to the ground, filling the hall with thick, acrid smoke. "Everyone to me!" I shouted, grabbing Bjorn's arm and pulling him towards the exit. We stumbled out into the pre-dawn light, coughing and gasping. A small group had managed to follow us, Inga, Gunnar, and a handful of warriors who seemed to have shaken off the worst of the poison's influence. "What now?" Gunnar asked, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. I took a deep breath, centering myself. The visions from the antidote still swirled in my mind, pieces of a puzzle I was struggling to put together. "We need help," I said finally. "More than we can find here in Iron Peak." Bjorn, who had been staring blankly at the ground, suddenly looked up. "The Shadowmere clan," he said. "They have powerful shamans, ancient knowledge." I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. "Yes, but there are sworn enemies. Crossing into their territory would be suicide." "Do we have a choice?" Inga asked, her voice trembling. I looked back at the great hall where inhuman shrieks and the clash of weapons could still be heard. "No," I said grimly. "We don't." And so, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, our small band of refugees set out from Iron Peak. We moved swiftly and silently through the forest, every shadow seeming to hide a potential threat. As we neared the border of Shadowmere territory, I called for a halt. "We need to be careful from here on out," I warned. "One wrong move, and we could start a war." Bjorn stepped forward, his face set in grim determination. "Let me go first," he said. "As Rurik's son, I might be able to negotiate." I hesitated, studying his face. The madness that had gripped him earlier seemed to have faded, replaced by a steely resolve. "All right," I agreed. "But I'm coming with you. The rest of you stay hidden, if we're not back by nightfall." I left the sentence unfinished, but everyone understood. This could very well be a one-way trip. Bjorn and I moved cautiously through the dense undergrowth, every sense on high alert. We had barely crossed what we believed to be the border when a voice rang out from the trees. "Halt! You trespass on Shadowmere land." We froze, raising our hands slowly. "We come in peace," I called out. "We seek audience with your chief." Silence fell, broken only by the rustle of leaves in the wind. Then suddenly we were surrounded. A dozen warriors melted out of the forest, their faces painted with intricate designs, their weapons trained on us. One of them, a tall woman with fierce eyes, stepped forward. "I am Vera, captain of the Shadowmere Guard. State your business, outsiders." Bjorn straightened, drawing himself up to his full height. "I am Bjorn, son of Rurik, chief of Iron Peak. We come seeking aid in a matter that threatens not just our clan, but all the lands." Vara's eyes narrowed. "Iron Peak? You have some nerve coming here after all the blood spilled between our people." "Please," I interjected. "We wouldn't be here if the situation wasn't dire. A great evil has taken hold in Iron Peak, a poison that corrupts both body and spirit." Something flickered in Vera's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or fear. "You speak of the shadow sickness," she said, her voice low. I blinked in surprise. "You know of it?" Vara exchanged glances with her warriors. After a moment of silent communication, she nodded. "Come with us. Our chief will want to hear this." As we were led through the Shadowmere village, I couldn't help but marvel at the differences from Iron Peak. Where our buildings were sturdy and practical, theirs seemed to grow organically from the forest itself. Intricate carvings and vibrant paintings adorned every surface, telling stories I could only guess at. We were brought to a large circular structure at the heart of the village. Inside, seated on a throne of twisted vines, was the Shadowmere chief. He was an old man, his face lined with age and wisdom, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Greetings, travelers from Iron Peak," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. "I am Chief Thorn. What brings you to our lands in such desperate times?" Bjorn stepped forward, bowing his head respectfully. "Chief Thorn, we come seeking aid. Our village has been struck by a terrible affliction, a poison that—" "The shadow sickness," Thorn interrupted, his expression grim. "Yes, we know of it. It has touched our lands as well, though we have managed to keep it at bay, for now." I felt a surge of hope. "Then you know how to cure it?" Thorn shook his head slowly. "Cure? No. But we have learned to resist its influence, to push back the darkness. Tell me, healer, what have you seen?" I recounted my experiences. The journey through the dark forest, the witch's bargain, the visions from the antidote. As I spoke, I saw the chief's expression grow increasingly troubled. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "The shadow sickness is no ordinary ailment. It is an ancient evil, one that has slumbered for centuries. Now it awakens, hungry and vengeful." "But why now?" Bjorn asked. "Why Iron Peak?" Thorn's gaze fell on Bjorn, and I saw something like pity in his eyes. "Because, young one, your father made a bargain he did not understand. In his quest for power and glory, he opened a door that should have remained closed." Bjorn staggered back as if struck. "No, you're lying!" I placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "Chief Thorn," I said, "if you know so much about this evil, surely you must know how to stop it." The old chief sighed heavily. "There is a way, but it is dangerous. Deep in the heart of the old forest lies an ancient temple. Within its walls is an artifact of great power, the Heartstone. It has the ability to purge the shadow sickness, to cleanse the land of its taint. Then we must retrieve it, I exclaimed. It's not that simple, Thorn warned. The temple is guarded by trials designed to test the worth of those who seek the Heartstone. Many have tried. None have returned. A heavy silence fell over the gathering. I looked at Bjorn, saw the conflict warring in his eyes. Then slowly, he straightened, his jaw set with determination. I'll do it, he said. This evil came to Iron Peak because of my father's actions. It's my responsibility to make it right. I nodded, feeling a swell of pride for the young man. And I'll go with you. My skills as a healer might be useful. Thorn studied us both, his ancient eyes seeming to peer into our very souls. Finally, he nodded. Very well. We will provide you with guides to lead you to the temple's entrance. But beyond that, you will be on your own. As we turned to leave, Thorn called out one last time. Remember this, travelers from Iron Peak. The shadow sickness feeds on fear, on doubt, on the darkness that lives in all our hearts. To overcome it, you must first overcome yourselves. With those ominous words ringing in our ears, Bjorn and I stepped out of the chief's dwelling and into the fading light of day. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. As we made preparations for our journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something monumental. The fate of not just Iron Peak, but perhaps the entire world, rested on our shoulders. Are you ready for this? I asked Bjorn softly. He met my gaze, and I saw in his eyes a mixture of fear and resolve. No, he admitted. But we don't have a choice, do we? I shook my head. No, we don't. But whatever comes, we'll face it together. As the sun set on the Shadowmere village, casting long shadows through the ancient trees, we set out on a journey that would test us in ways we could scarcely imagine. The temple awaited, and with it, the key to saving our people, if only we were worthy of claiming it. The forest grew denser and darker as Bjorn and I pushed deeper into its heart. Our Shadowmere guides had left us at the edge of what they called the Whispering Woods, their faces grim as they wished us luck. Now it was just the two of us, following an ancient map towards a destiny neither of us fully understood. Do you hear that? Bjorn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I paused, straining my ears. At first I heard nothing but the rustle of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig under our feet. Then, slowly, I became aware of something else. A faint, rhythmic susurration, like countless voices murmuring just beyond the range of comprehension. The Whispering Woods, I breathed. They weren't just being poetic. Bjorn's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. What are they saying? I shook my head. I'm not sure we want to know. Come on, we need to keep moving. As we pressed on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I found myself straining to make out words, only to shake my head and refocus on our path. More than once I caught Bjorn veering off course, his eyes glazed as if in a trance. Bjorn, I called out, grasping his arm. Stay with me. Don't listen to the voices. He blinked, coming back to himself. I thought I heard my father calling me. I squeezed his arm reassuringly. It's not real. Remember what Chief Thorn said? We have to overcome ourselves first. Bjorn nodded, his jaw set with determination. Right. Let's find this damn temple and be done with it. As if in response to his words, the forest suddenly opened up before us. We found ourselves standing at the edge of a vast clearing, and there, rising from the mist, was a structure that took my breath away. The temple was an impossibly tall spire of black stone, its surface etched with glowing runes that pulsed with an eerie light. At its base, a massive doorway gaped open like the maw of some great beast. By the gods, Bjorn whispered. It's real. I nodded, unable to find words. As we approached the entrance, I felt a prickle of energy across my skin as if we were passing through an invisible barrier. Just inside the doorway, we found an antechamber lit by flickering torches. Ancient murals covered the walls, depicting scenes of battle, triumph, and terrible sacrifice. At the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, upon which rested a crystal orb. As we drew closer, the orb began to glow and a voice echoed through the chamber. Not a physical sound, but words that formed directly in our minds. Welcome, seekers of the Heartstone. To prove your worth, you must face 3 trials: the trial of body, the trial of mind, and the trial of spirit. Only those who overcome all 3 may claim the power to banish the shadow sickness. Bjorn and I exchanged glances. Well, he said with a grim smile, no one said it would be easy. The orb pulsed once more, and a doorway appeared in the far wall. The trial of body awaits, the voice intoned. Enter, if you dare. Taking a deep breath, we stepped through the doorway. Immediately, the world around us shifted and changed. We found ourselves standing on a narrow stone bridge spanning a bottomless chasm. At the far end, we could see a glowing portal, our way forward. But between us and the portal stood a figure in gleaming armor, sword raised and ready. Is that... Bjorn gasped. An illusion, I said quickly. It has to be. The figure before us was Rurik, not the corrupted monster we'd left behind in Iron Peak, but Rurik as he had been in his prime, a fearsome warrior of legend. To pass, the illusory Rurik spoke, his voice echoing unnaturally. You must defeat me in combat. Bjorn stepped forward, drawing his sword. Father, No, I interrupted, placing a hand on his arm. This isn't your father, Bjorn. It's a test. We need to think this through. But Bjorn shook off my hand, his eyes blazing with a mixture of pain and determination. Test or not, I have to do this. For Iron Peak. For my real father. Before I could stop him, Bjorn charged forward. The clash of steel on steel rang out as he engaged the phantom Rurik in combat. I watched, heart in my throat, as they traded blows back and forth across the narrow bridge. Bjorn fought with all the skill and strength he possessed, but the illusory Rurik was relentless, matching him move for move. As the battle wore on, I could see Bjorn tiring, his strikes becoming slower, less precise. Bjorn, I called out, remember why we're here. This isn't about defeating your father. It's about saving him. Something in my words seemed to reach him. Bjorn's stance shifted, and suddenly he was fighting differently, not attacking, but defending, giving ground deliberately. The phantom Rurik pressed its advantage, driving Bjorn back step by step. Just when it seemed Bjorn would be forced off the edge of the bridge, he dropped his sword. I will not fight you, father, he said, his voice steady. Not the memory of you, not the corrupted version of you. I'm here to save you, and all of Iron Peak. For a moment, the illusory Rurik froze. Then, slowly, it lowered its sword and nodded. You have passed the trial of body, it said, before fading away like mist in the morning sun. The portal at the end of the bridge flared to life. Bjorn turned to me, a look of wonder on his face. I did it, he breathed. I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. You did. You understood what the trial was really about. As we stepped through the portal, the scene shifted once more. This time we found ourselves in a vast library, shelves stretching as far as the eye could see in every direction. At the center of the room was a large table, covered in ancient tomes and scrolls. The trial of mind, a disembodied voice announced. To pass, you must unravel the mystery hidden within these texts. But beware, knowledge can be a double-edged sword. I approached the table, my eyes widening as I took in the wealth of information before us. This could take days, I murmured. Bjorn joined me, picking up one of the scrolls. We don't have days. The longer we take, the more Iron Peak suffers. As we began to sift through the texts, I felt a strange sensation creeping over me. The words on the pages seemed to shift and change, revealing secrets of magic and power I had never dreamed possible. I found myself lost in the knowledge, hungry for more. Freya? Bjorn's voice seemed to come from far away. Freya, snap out of it. I blinked, realizing with a start that I had been poring over the same page for what felt like hours. What's happening? Bjorn's face was grim. The texts, they're enchanted somehow. They're trying to trap us, to make us lose ourselves in the pursuit of knowledge. I shook my head, trying to clear it. You're right. We need to focus. What are we really looking for? We turned our attention back to the task at hand, forcing ourselves to skim the texts rather than dive deep into their mysteries. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. References to a shadow beneath the mountain, a poison in the heart of the land. Look at this, Bjorn said, pointing to a map he had uncovered. These markings, they match the path of the poison spread through Iron Peak. I leaned in, studying the map. You're right. And look here, the source. It's not in Iron Peak at all. It's the temple, we said in unison. As the realization dawned, the library around us began to fade away. We found ourselves standing before another portal, this one pulsing with a deep, ominous light. You have passed the trial of mind, the disembodied voice intoned. But the greatest challenge yet awaits. Prepare yourselves for the trial of spirit. Bjorn and I exchanged glances, both of us feeling the weight of what we had discovered. The source of the poison, the root of the evil threatening our home, lay within this very temple. Whatever the final trial held, we knew it would push us to our very limits. Are you ready? I asked softly. Bjorn took a deep breath, then nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Hand in hand, we stepped through the portal, ready to confront whatever challenges the trial of spirit had in store for us. And perhaps, to finally uncover the truth behind the shadow sickness that threatened to consume our world. As Bjorn and I stepped through the portal, the world around us dissolved into inky blackness. For a moment, I felt as if I were floating in a void, disconnected from my own body. Then, gradually, a scene began to take shape around us. We found ourselves standing in what appeared to be the Great Hall of Iron Peak, but it was twisted, wrong somehow. The walls seemed to pulse with sickly green light, and shadows writhed in the corners like living things. What is this place? Bjorn whispered, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword. Before I could answer, a figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the hall. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the grotesquely transformed form of Rurik, just as we had left him in Iron Peak. Welcome, my son, the creature that was once Rurik hissed. Welcome, little healer. I've been expecting you. Bjorn tensed beside me. You're not my father, he growled. The creature laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. Oh, but I am. I am what your father truly is, what he has always been beneath the surface. The poison didn't change me, boy. It merely revealed my true nature. I placed a steadying hand on Bjorn's arm. This is the trial of spirit, I murmured. It's not real, we need to overcome it. Oh, it's quite real, the creature said, its voice dripping with malice. This is the truth you've been seeking, the heart of the shadow sickness. And now you have a choice to make. With a wave of its twisted hand, the creature conjured two shimmering images in the air. On one side, I saw Iron Peak as it had been, peaceful, prosperous, its people happy and healthy. On the other, I saw a vision of Iron Peak transformed, its buildings warped and twisted, its people empowered by the shadow sickness, their eyes glowing with unnatural strength. Join me, the creature offered. Embrace the shadow sickness. With its power, Iron Peak could rule over all the clans. No one would ever threaten us again. We could reshape the world in our image. I felt a surge of revulsion at the idea, but to my horror I saw Bjorn hesitate, his eyes fixed on the vision of a transformed Iron Peak. Bjorn, I said urgently, don't listen to it. This isn't what your father would want. This isn't what you want. Bjorn turned to me, his eyes conflicted. But Freya, look at the power we could have. We could protect our people, ensure they never suffer again. The creature that was Rurik smiled, a grotesque parody of fatherly pride. That's right, my son. Think of all we could accomplish. The Shadowmere clan would bow before us. Even the great cities of the south would tremble at our name. I shook my head vehemently. At what cost, Bjorn? Look at what the shadow sickness does. It doesn't just change bodies, it corrupts souls. This isn't protection, it's destruction. For a long moment, Bjorn stood frozen, torn between the seductive promise of power and the truth he knew in his heart. I held my breath, knowing that everything hinged on his decision. Finally, Bjorn straightened, his jaw set with determination. No, he said firmly. This isn't the way. My father, my real father, taught me that true strength comes from protecting others, not dominating them. I reject your offer. The creature's face contorted with rage. Fool, it snarled. If you will not join us willingly, then you will be consumed. Suddenly, the shadows in the room came alive, surging towards us like a tidal wave of darkness. I felt them wash over me, cold and suffocating, threatening to drag me down into endless night. Bjorn, I cried out, reaching for him blindly. I felt his hand grasp mine, strong and sure. I'm here, Freya. Don't let go. Together we stood firm against the onslaught of shadows. I focused on the warmth of Bjorn's hand in mine, on the memory of Iron Peak as it should be, on all the people counting on us to succeed. Slowly, painfully, I felt something building within me. A light, small at first, but growing stronger with each passing moment. From the corner of my eye, I saw a similar glow emanating from Bjorn. No! The creature howled. This cannot be. The light burst forth from us in a blinding flash, pushing back the shadows. When my vision cleared, I saw that the twisted version of the great hall had vanished. We were standing in a small, circular chamber, and there, floating in the center, was a softly glowing crystal. The Heartstone. We did it. Bjorn breathed, a look of wonder on his face. I nodded, feeling a profound sense of relief. We faced our deepest fears and overcame them. That was the true trial of spirit. As we approached the Heartstone, I felt its power washing over me, warm and comforting. It pulsed gently, as if welcoming us. How do we use it? Bjorn asked, reaching out tentatively. Before I could answer, a new voice filled the chamber. Not the menacing hiss of the corrupted Rurik, but a softer, more melodious tone. You have proven yourselves worthy, the voice said. But know this. The power of the Heartstone comes at a price. To cleanse the land of the shadow sickness, one of you must bond with the stone, becoming its vessel and guardian. Bjorn and I exchanged glances. What does that mean exactly? I asked. The chosen one will carry the power of the Heartstone within them, the voice explained. They will have the ability to purge the shadow sickness wherever they go, but they will also be bound to the stone for life, unable to ever truly return to their old existence. A heavy silence fell over the chamber as we absorbed this information. It was Bjorn who broke it first. I'll do it, he said firmly. This all started because of my father's actions. It's my responsibility to make it right. I felt a surge of admiration for his bravery, but also a pang of worry. Bjorn, are you sure? This isn't a decision to be made lightly. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and sadness. I'm sure, Freya. Iron Peak needs its healer, and I think this is what I was always meant to do. To protect our people, no matter the cost. I wanted to argue, to tell him we could find another way, but I knew in my heart that he was right. This was his destiny, as surely as healing was mine. All right, I said softly, squeezing his hand. But know that you won't be alone. Whatever happens, I'll be by your side. Bjorn smiled, a genuine warm smile that reminded me of the boy he had been before all this began. "I know," he said. "I couldn't ask for a better friend." With that, he turned to the heartstone and reached out. As his fingers touched the crystal, there was a blinding flash of light. I shielded my eyes, and when I looked again, I gasped in awe. Bjorn was floating several inches off the ground, his body suffused with a soft, golden glow. The heartstone had vanished, but I could see its power shimmering just beneath his skin. When he opened his eyes, they were no longer their usual brown, but a brilliant, swirling gold. "Freya," he said, his voice resonating with newfound power. "I can feel it. The sickness, the corruption, I can sense it all." "How do you feel?" I asked, both concerned and fascinated. He flexed his fingers, a look of wonder on his face. "Strong, whole, like I finally understand my purpose." His expression turned serious. "But we need to hurry. I can feel the shadow sickness spreading, corrupting more of the land with each passing moment." I nodded, my healer's instincts kicking in. "Right. We need to get back to Iron Peak as quickly as possible." As if in response to our words, a new portal shimmered into existence at the edge of the chamber. Through it, we could see the familiar forests surrounding our village. "Looks like the temple approves of our plan," I said with a wry smile. Bjorn nodded, then hesitated. "Freya, before we go, thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." I felt a lump form in my throat. Despite our success, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed, that the Bjorn I had known was gone forever. But I pushed the thought aside. We had a village to save. "That's what friends are for," I said, managing a smile. "Now let's go save Iron Peak." Hand in hand, we stepped through the portal. The serene quiet of the temple faded away, replaced by the sounds of chaos and conflict. Iron Peak lay before us, a sickly green miasma hanging over the village like a shroud. "By the gods," I breathed, taking in the scene of devastation. Bjorn's eyes narrowed, the golden light within them pulsing with barely contained power. "It ends now," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "No more will fall to the shadow sickness, not while I draw breath." As we made our way down the hill towards the village, I saw heads turn in our direction. Even from a distance, I could see the mix of fear, hope, and awe on the faces of our people. A figure broke away from the crowd running towards us. As they drew closer, I recognized Inga, her face streaked with tears of relief. "Freya, Bjorn, you're alive," she cried, embracing us both. Then she pulled back, her eyes widening as she took in Bjorn's transformed appearance. What happened to you?" Bjorn smiled gently. "It's a long story, Inga. But know this. I bring the cure for the shadow sickness. Iron Peak will be saved." A ragged cheer went up from the gathered villagers. But before we could celebrate, a bone-chilling roar split the air. The crowd parted, revealing the monstrous form of the corrupted Rurik, shadows writhing around him like a cloak of living darkness. "So," the creature hissed, its eyes fixed on Bjorn, "the prodigal son returns, and bearing gifts no less." Bjorn stepped forward, his body glowing even brighter in the face of such darkness. "Father," he said, his voice firm but compassionate, "this ends now. Let me help you. Let me free you from this corruption." The creature laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Free me? Foolish boy. I am more powerful than I have ever been. Why would I want to be freed from such glorious strength?" "Because this isn't you," Bjorn insisted. "The father I knew valued honor, compassion, the well-being of his people. This corruption has twisted your mind, made you forget who you truly are." For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in the creature's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by rage. "Enough!" it roared. "If you will not join us in embracing this power, then you will be destroyed." The creature lunged forward, shadows coalescing around its clawed hands into wicked-looking blades. Bjorn stood his ground, the light of the Heartstone flaring to life around him. As the two clashed in a battle of light and shadow, I turned to the gathered villagers. "Quick!" I shouted. "Get everyone who's still unaffected by the sickness to safety. Inga, I need you to gather all the healing supplies you can find. We need to be ready to treat people once the sickness is purged." The villagers sprang into action, a sense of purpose overcoming their fear. I watched with pride as they worked together, helping the sick and injured, fortifying defenses against those too far gone to the sickness. Meanwhile, the battle between Bjorn and the corrupted Rurik raged on. It was a sight unlike anything I had ever seen. Darkness and light intertwining, each seeking to overcome the other. The very air seemed to crackle with the intensity of their conflict. As I worked to coordinate the village's efforts, I kept one eye on the fight. Bjorn was holding his own, the power of the Heartstone matching the creature's corrupted strength. But I could see that the conflict was taking its toll. The golden glow around him flickered and wavered with each powerful blow from the creature. "Bjorn," I called out, "remember why you're fighting. Remember who you're fighting for." His eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I saw renewed determination flood his face. With a mighty cry, he pushed forward, the light around him blazing brighter than ever. The creature that was once Rurik staggered back, hissing in pain. "No, I will not be defeated by my own weak-willed offspring." "You're right," Bjorn said, his voice calm but powerful. "You won't be defeated by me. You'll be saved by me." With that, he reached out and placed his hand on the creature's chest. There was a blinding flash of light, and a sound like 1,000 voices crying out at once. I shielded my eyes, my heart pounding in my chest. When the light faded, I blinked, trying to clear the spots from my vision. There, where the monstrous creature had stood, was Rurik. The real Rurik, human and whole once more. He fell to his knees, gasping for breath. Bjorn knelt beside him, supporting his father. The golden glow of the Heartstone's power still shimmered around him, but softer now, more controlled. "It's over, Father," he said gently. "The shadow sickness is gone. You're free." Rurik looked up, his eyes clear for the first time in months. "Bjorn, my son, what have I done?" As father and son embraced, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The nightmare was finally over. The shadow sickness was defeated, and Iron Peak was saved. But as I watched Bjorn still glowing with the power of the Heartstone, I knew that our journey was far from over. The shadow sickness had been purged from Iron Peak, but what about other villages, other lands? How far had the corruption spread? I approached Bjorn and Rurik, feeling the weight of the future settling on my shoulders. "We did it," I said softly, "but I fear this is only the beginning." Bjorn met my gaze, understanding in his golden eyes. "You're right," he said. "There's more work to be done. But whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As the sun began to rise over Iron Peak, bathing the village in warm, cleansing light, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that with Bjorn by my side, with the power of the Heartstone to guide us, we would find a way to overcome them. The shadow sickness had been defeated, but our true journey, the journey to heal not just Iron Peak but the entire world, was only just beginning. The days following the defeat of the shadow sickness in Iron Peak were a blur of activity. As the village's healer, I found myself working tirelessly to tend to those who had been affected by the corruption. Though Bjorn had purged the active sickness from our people, many still bore the scars, both physical and mental, of their ordeal. It was dawn on the 5th day when I finally allowed myself a moment of rest. I stood at the edge of the village, watching the sun rise over the misty forests, when I heard footsteps approaching. "You should be resting." Bjorn's voice came from behind me, tinged with concern. I turned to face him, taking in his transformed appearance. The golden glow of the Heartstone's power had dimmed to a subtle shimmer that seemed to radiate from within him. His eyes, once a warm brown, now swirled with flecks of gold. "I could say the same to you," I replied with a tired smile. "How are you feeling?" Bjorn came to stand beside me, his gaze distant. Strange, he admitted. I can feel the power of the Heartstone constantly, like a second heartbeat, and I can sense echoes, I suppose, of the shadow sickness. Not just here, but far beyond Iron Peak. I felt a chill run down my spine. How far? He shook his head. I'm not sure, but far enough to be worrying. Freya, I don't think our work is done. I nodded, having come to the same conclusion myself. I know, but Bjorn, Iron Peak needs you. Your father needs you. Are you sure you want to leave? Bjorn was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. When he spoke, his voice was filled with a mixture of determination and regret. I don't want to leave, but I have to. This power, this responsibility, it's not just for Iron Peak. If there are others suffering from the shadow sickness, I have to help them. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by the arrival of Rurik. The chief of Iron Peak looked years older than he had before the shadow sickness, but his eyes were clear and focused. I thought I might find you two here, he said, his voice gruff but affectionate. Always plotting and planning, even at this hour. Bjorn turned to his father, a conflicted expression on his face. Father, Rurik held up a hand, silencing him. I know, son. I've seen that look in your eyes. You're planning to leave, aren't you? Bjorn nodded, tension visible in the set of his shoulders. There are others out there who need help. The shadow sickness has spread further than we realized. I have to go. I expected Rurik to argue, to insist that Bjorn stay and help rebuild Iron Peak. But the old chief surprised me. You're right, he said softly. The power you've been given, it's not just for us. It's for all those who suffer. He placed a hand on Bjorn's shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. You've grown into a finer man than I ever was, my son. Go. Do what you must. Bjorn embraced his father tightly, and I felt my own eyes growing misty at the scene. When they parted, Rurik turned to me. And you, Freya? Will you go with him? I blinked in surprise. I hadn't thought about it. Iron Peak needs its healer. Rurik smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. Iron Peak has other healers. Good ones, thanks to your teaching. But out there, they'll need someone with your skills, your knowledge. And, he added with a chuckle, someone needs to keep my son out of trouble. I looked at Bjorn, saw the hope in his eyes, and felt something settle in my chest. A sense of rightness, of purpose. All right, I said, a smile spreading across my face. When do we leave? The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Word spread quickly of our impending departure, and it seemed like the entire village wanted to contribute something to our journey. Inga organized a group of apprentice healers to prepare medicinal supplies. The blacksmith worked day and night to craft lightweight but sturdy armor for us both. Even the children got involved, gathering berries and nuts for our travels. On the morning of our departure, the entire village gathered to see us off. Rurik stood at the forefront, his face a mixture of pride and sadness. My people, he called out, his voice carrying across the crowd. Today we bid farewell to two of Iron Peak's finest. They go not as exiles, but as emissaries. They carry with them the strength and spirit of our clan, and they go to bring healing to a wounded world. He turned to us, his eyes shining. Bjorn, my son. Freya, who has been like a daughter to me. May the gods watch over you on your journey. And may you always remember that Iron Peak is your home, no matter how far you roam. As we made our way through the crowd, there were tears and embraces, words of encouragement and promises to return. Inga hugged me fiercely, pressing a book into my hands. My notes on all the healing techniques you've taught me, she explained, her voice thick with emotion, in case you need a reminder of home. Finally, we reached the edge of the village. Bjorn and I exchanged glances, both of us feeling the weight of the moment. Ready? He asked softly. I nodded, adjusting the strap of my healer's bag. Ready. And with that, we set off down the path, the cheers and well-wishes of Iron Peak fading behind us. For the first few days of our journey, we traveled in relative silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The familiar forests around Iron Peak gradually gave way to landscapes neither of us had ever seen before. Rolling hills, vast plains, dense jungles. Each new vista filled me with a sense of wonder and trepidation. It was on the evening of the fourth day, as we made camp by a bubbling stream, that Bjorn finally broke the contemplative silence that had fallen between us. "Freya," he said, his voice hesitant, "there's something I need to tell you." I looked up from the fire I was building, concern etching my features. "What is it?" Bjorn's eyes, swirling with golden light, met mine. "The Heartstone. It's changing me. Not just physically, but I'm starting to see things, know things." I set aside the flint I was holding, giving him my full attention. "What kind of things?" He gestured vaguely at the air around us. "It's like I can see the threads of life connecting everything, the trees, the animals, even the earth itself. And I can sense where those threads are frayed or broken by the shadow sickness." I absorbed this information, my mind racing with the implications. "Can you tell how far the sickness has spread?" Bjorn nodded grimly. "Far. Further than we imagined, and it's not just affecting people, Freya. It's in the land itself, corrupting everything it touches." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Then our task is even greater than we thought." "Yes," Bjorn agreed, "but that's not all. I think I know where we need to go next." He reached down, tracing a pattern in the dirt. As I watched, a map began to take shape, not just of the lands we knew, but of places I'd only heard of in legends. "Here," he said, pointing to a spot far to the south. "There's a city there, larger than any we've ever seen. And it's screaming, Freya. The shadow sickness has taken root deep within it." I stared at the crude map, a mixture of excitement and fear coursing through me. That's days of travel at least, and we don't know what dangers we might face along the way. Bjorn met my gaze, determination burning in his eyes. "I know, but we have to try. Those people need our help." I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "Then that's where we'll go. But Bjorn," I added, reaching out to clasp his hand, "promise me something." "Anything," he said without hesitation. "Promise me that no matter what changes the Heartstone brings, no matter what powers you develop, you'll always remain the Bjorn I know, the one who cares more about helping others than gaining power for himself." Bjorn squeezed my hand, a soft smile playing at his lips. "I promise, Freya. You'll always be here to keep me grounded." With our destination decided, we set out at first light the next morning. The journey was long and often perilous. We crossed raging rivers, scaled treacherous mountain passes, and traversed scorching deserts. Along the way, we encountered small villages and settlements, many of them touched by the shadow sickness to varying degrees. In each place, we stopped to help as best we could. Bjorn would use the power of the Heartstone to purge the active sickness, while I tended to the aftermath, using my skills as a healer to mend bodies and soothe troubled minds. It was in one such village, a small farming community nestled in a verdant valley, that we faced our first real test since leaving Iron Peak. As we approached the village, the wrongness of the place was immediately apparent. The fields lay fallow, choked with weeds. The few villagers we could see moved like sleepwalkers, their eyes unfocused and their movements jerky. "The sickness is strong here," Bjorn murmured, his body tensing as if in pain. "It's had time to take deep root." We made our way to the village center, where a group of blank-eyed villagers had gathered. An old woman, her face lined with age and worry, approached us. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Have you come to join us in the blessed sleep?" I exchanged a worried glance with Bjorn. "We've come to help," I said gently. Your village is sick. We can cure you." The old woman's face contorted in a grotesque parody of a smile. "Sick? No, child. We are enlightened. The shadows have shown us the truth of existence. Why struggle against the darkness when we can embrace it?" As she spoke, I noticed the other villagers beginning to close in around us, their movements becoming more purposeful, more menacing. "Bjorn," I said urgently, "we need to do something. Now." He nodded, closing his eyes in concentration. The golden glow of the Heartstone's power began to emanate from him, growing brighter by the second. The villagers recoiled, hissing in pain and anger. "Stop!" the old woman shrieked. "You'll ruin everything." Bjorn's eyes snapped open, blazing with golden light. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice resonating with power, "but this ends now." A pulse of energy exploded outward from Bjorn, washing over the village in a wave of golden light. I watched in awe as the sickly pallor faded from the villagers' skin, as awareness returned to their eyes. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a child's cry broke the stillness. "Mama, Papa, what happened?" The village erupted into chaos. Cries of confusion, tearful reunions, and expressions of gratitude all mingling together. I immediately set to work, moving among the villagers to treat any lingering effects of the sickness. Hours later, as the sun began to set, Bjorn and I finally allowed ourselves to rest. We sat on the edge of the village well, watching as life slowly returned to normal around us. "You did it," I said softly, bumping my shoulder against his. "You saved them all." Bjorn nodded, but his expression was troubled. "This time, but Freya, what we saw here, this complete surrender to the shadow sickness, I fear we'll see more of it as we get closer to the city." I took his hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "Then we'll face it together, just like we always have." As night fell and the village settled into an uneasy sleep, Bjorn and I kept watch. We knew that our journey was far from over, that greater challenges lay ahead, but for now we had this victory. We had brought light back to a place of darkness, and in doing so, we had reaffirmed our purpose. The road to healing would be long and difficult, but as I looked at Bjorn, saw the determination in his eyes, and felt the strength of his presence beside me, I knew that we were equal to the task. Whatever lay ahead, we would face it together, bringing hope and healing to a world desperately in need of both. The sprawling metropolis loomed before us, a stark silhouette against the blood-red sky of dusk. After weeks of travel, we had finally reached our destination, the great southern city that Bjorn had seen in his vision. But as we drew closer, it became clear that we were too late to prevent the shadow sickness from taking hold. The city walls, once proud and gleaming, were now stained with streaks of sickly green. The air was thick with an acrid fog that made my eyes water and my throat burn. Even from a distance we could hear the sounds of chaos, screams, crashes, and an underlying hum that set my teeth on edge. "By the gods," I whispered, horror and awe mingling in my voice. "Bjorn, what are we walking into?" Bjorn's face was grim, his golden eyes swirling with barely contained power. "The heart of the corruption, Freya. This city, it's like a festering wound in the fabric of the world." We approached the main gates cautiously. They hung open, twisted and warped as if melted by some great heat. As we passed through, a wave of nausea hit me so hard I stumbled. "Freya!" Bjorn caught me before I could fall. "Are you all right?" I nodded weakly, forcing myself to stand straight. "I'm fine. It's just the sickness. It's so strong here." Bjorn's expression softened with concern. "Maybe you should wait outside the city. I can—" "No," I cut him off firmly. "We do this together, remember? I'll be fine." He held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. "All right. But stay close." As we made our way deeper into the city, the full extent of the devastation became clear. Buildings were warped and twisted, their architecture defying logic and sanity. The few people we saw moved like puppets with tangled strings, their eyes vacant, and their mouths hanging open in silent screams. We had nearly reached what appeared to be the city center when a voice rang out, cracked and desperate. "Help! Please, somebody help us!" Bjorn and I exchanged glances before hurrying towards the sound. We found ourselves in front of a large building, a temple perhaps, or a civic hall. The doors were barricaded, but we could hear the sounds of conflict from within. "Stand back," Bjorn warned. He placed his hands on the barricade, and I watched as golden light spread from his palms, disintegrating the twisted metal and wood. As the barricade fell away, a group of people spilled out. Men, women, and children, their faces gaunt with hunger and fear. An older man, his beard streaked with gray, stepped forward. "Thank the heavens," he breathed. "We thought all hope was lost. I am Aldrich, once a council member of this city. Who are you?" "I'm Freya, a healer from Iron Peak," I introduced myself. "And this is Bjorn. We've come to help." Aldrich's eyes widened as he took in Bjorn's glowing form. You're not affected by the sickness. How is this possible?" Bjorn stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "It's a long story, Aldrich. But right now, we need to know what happened here. How did the shadow sickness take hold so completely?" Aldrich's face fell, shame and regret etching deep lines around his eyes. "It was our own folly," he admitted. "Our city has always prided itself on its knowledge, its scientific advancements. When we first discovered the shadow sickness in a remote mining outpost, we thought we could study it, control it, perhaps even use it to our advantage. You tried to weaponize it," I said, unable to keep the horror from my voice. Aldrich nodded miserably. "We thought we were so clever, so advanced. But the sickness, it was smarter. It played on our pride, our ambition. By the time we realized the true danger, it was too late. The sickness had spread throughout the city, corrupting everything it touched." As Aldrich spoke, I noticed Bjorn growing tenser, his golden glow pulsing erratically. "Bjorn?" I asked, concerned. "What is it?" His eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of determination and fear. "The source, Freya. I can feel it. It's here in this city, the heart of the shadow sickness." A ripple of fear went through the gathered survivors. Aldrich stepped forward, his voice urgent. "You can stop this? You can save our city?" Bjorn hesitated, and I could see the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. I don't know," he admitted. "But I have to try." I placed a hand on his arm, lending what support I could. "We have to try," I corrected gently. He gave me a grateful smile before turning back to Aldrich. "We'll do what we can, but first, we need to get these people to safety. Is there anywhere in the city that's still untouched by the sickness?" Aldrich shook his head. "Nowhere is truly safe. But there's an old underground shelter system built generations ago. It's where we've been hiding. It's not much, but it's the best protection we have." "It'll have to do," I said. "Lead the way, Aldrich. We'll escort you there." As we made our way through the twisted streets, guiding the survivors towards safety, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edge of my vision, always disappearing when I turned to look directly at them. We had almost reached the entrance to the underground shelter when a blood-curdling shriek split the air. From the shadows of a nearby alley, a figure lunged towards us. A man, but so twisted by the shadow sickness that he barely looked human anymore. His eyes glowed with an unholy green light, and his fingers had elongated into wicked claws. "Fresh meat," he howled, leaping towards the nearest survivor. Bjorn reacted instantly. A burst of golden light erupted from his hand, catching the corrupted man in midair and throwing him back. "Get them inside," he shouted to Aldrich. "Now!" As Aldrich hurried the survivors into the shelter, more corrupted citizens began to emerge from the shadows. They moved with an unnatural speed and agility, their faces contorted with hunger and madness. Bjorn and I stood back to back, facing the oncoming horde. "Any ideas?" I asked, my voice tight with tension. Just one, Bjorn replied. And you're not going to like it. Before I could ask what he meant, Bjorn raised his hands, golden light blazing from his palms. A dome of energy expanded outward, encompassing us and the entrance to the shelter. The corrupted citizens threw themselves against it, howling in rage and pain as the pure energy burned their twisted forms. Bjorn, I cried out, seeing the strain on his face. You can't keep this up forever. I don't need forever, he grunted. Just long enough. Freya, listen to me. I need you to go with Aldrich and the others. Keep them safe. I felt my heart drop. No, absolutely not. I'm not leaving you. His eyes met mine, filled with a swirling mix of gold and anguish. You have to. I can feel it, Freya. The source of the sickness. It's calling to me. I have to go to it. Have to try to stop it. But I can't do that if I'm worried about you. And you think I won't worry if you go alone? I argued. Bjorn, we're in this together. We always have been. For a moment I thought he would continue to argue, but then his expression softened and he nodded. You're right, as always. He turned to Aldrich, who was watching our exchange with a mixture of awe and fear. Aldrich, can you and your people hold out in the shelter? Aldrich nodded firmly. We've managed this long. Go. Do what you must to save our city. With a final nod, Bjorn let the energy dome fall. In the moment of confusion that followed, we slipped away, running deeper into the heart of the corrupted city. As we ran, the city seemed to twist and change around us. Streets that should have been straight bent at impossible angles. Buildings loomed and receded like waves on a stormy sea, and always the shadows reached for us with hungry tendrils. Finally, we found ourselves in front of a massive structure that pulsed with sickly green light. It might once have been a grand palace or a seat of government, but now it was a nightmare made real. A twisted spire of darkness that clawed at the sky. This is it, Bjorn said, his voice hushed. The heart of the sickness. It's in there. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Then that's where we're going. As we approached the entrance, a figure stepped out of the shadows to block our path. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized him. It was the corrupted man who had attacked us earlier, but he seemed different now. More in control, more aware. Well, he said, his voice a raspy growl. The golden boy and his little healer. We've been expecting you. Bjorn stepped forward, his body tensed for a fight. Who are you? What have you done to this city? The corrupted man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Who am I? I am the voice of the shadow sickness. I am the will of the darkness. And what I've done. He spread his arms wide, indicating the twisted cityscape around us. I've set them free. Free from their petty concerns, their meaningless lives. In the shadow sickness, they have found true purpose. I felt a chill run down my spine at his words. You're insane, I said. This isn't freedom, it's slavery to corruption. The man's glowing eyes fixed on me, and I felt as if I were being crushed under the weight of his gaze. Such conviction, he mocked. But tell me, little healer, have you ever considered that perhaps it is you who are enslaved, bound by your narrow perceptions of right and wrong, good and evil? Enough, Bjorn's voice rang out, echoing with the power of the Heartstone. We're here to end this. Step aside, or be destroyed. The corrupted man's face split in a terrible grin. Oh, I don't think so. You see, you may have your little stone of power, boy, but I have an entire city. Let's see how you fare against the full might of the shadow sickness. With a gesture, the very air around us seemed to come alive with writhing darkness. From every shadow, every crack in the twisted buildings, corrupted citizens began to emerge. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all with the same glowing green eyes and distorted forms. Bjorn and I stood back to back once more, facing the encroaching horde. The corrupted leader laughed maniacally as his army closed in around us. Last chance, Freya, Bjorn said, his voice tight with tension. You can still run. I reached back and squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of the Heartstone's power flowing through him. Not a chance. Together, remember? As the horde of corrupted citizens lunged towards us, Bjorn's power flared to life, a beacon of golden light in a sea of darkness. The battle for the fate of the city, and perhaps the world, had begun. And as I stood there, facing impossible odds with Bjorn at my side, I felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever happened next, we would face it as we had faced everything else on this journey. Together. The corrupted leader's laughter rang out once more. A challenge and a promise of the struggle to come. But in that moment, standing in the heart of darkness with the light of the Heartstone blazing beside me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The horde of corrupted citizens surged towards us, a writhing mass of twisted limbs and glowing green eyes. Bjorn's power flared, a dome of golden light expanding outward to create a barrier between us and the oncoming wave of corruption. Freya. Bjorn grunted, the strain evident in his voice. I can't hold them all back forever. We need a plan. I scanned our surroundings, my mind racing. The twisted spire that housed the heart of the shadow sickness loomed behind us, its sickly green glow pulsing like a diseased heartbeat. There, I pointed. If we can get inside, maybe we can find a way to stop this at its source. Bjorn nodded, his jaw clenched with determination. All right, on my mark, run for the entrance. I'll cover you. Together, I reminded him firmly. A ghost of a smile flickered across his face. Together, he agreed. With a mighty shout, Bjorn thrust his hands forward. The dome of golden light exploded outward, sending the closest corrupted citizens flying backward. In that moment of chaos, we sprinted for the entrance of the spire. The corrupted leader's voice rang out behind us, filled with rage and something that almost sounded like fear. Stop them. They must not reach the heart. We burst through the entrance, finding ourselves in a vast, twisting chamber. The architecture defied logic, with staircases that led to nowhere and doors set into the ceiling. Throughout it all, veins of sickly green energy pulsed, feeding the corruption that had overtaken the city. Which way? I gasped, trying to make sense of our surroundings. Bjorn closed his eyes, his face a mask of concentration. The golden glow of the Heartstone's power intensified around him. This way, he said after a moment, pointing to a spiraling staircase that seemed to lead both up and down simultaneously. I can feel the source of the corruption. It's calling to me. As we began to ascend, or descend, the staircase, the very air around us seemed to thicken. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, whispering promises and threats in equal measure. Freya. A voice that sounded disturbingly like my mother's called out. Why do you resist? Join us in the shadows. All your doubts, all your fears, they can all melt away. I shook my head violently, trying to clear it. Bjorn, I said, my voice shaking, please tell me you're hearing this too. His hand found mine, squeezing reassuringly. I hear it. The sickness, it's trying to get into our heads. Stay focused on why we're here, on who we're fighting for. I nodded, gritting my teeth and pushing forward. As we climbed, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I saw visions of Iron Peak in flames, of Bjorn corrupted by the very power he wielded, of myself giving into the darkness and reveling in its cold embrace. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, we emerged onto a platform suspended in what seemed to be the very heart of the spire. And there, pulsing with malevolent energy, was the source of it all. A swirling vortex of darkness shot through with veins of sickly green light. At last, a voice boomed, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The corrupted leader stepped out of the shadows, his form more monstrous than ever. You've come to witness the birth of a new world order. Bjorn stepped forward, his body blazing with golden light. This ends now. Whatever you think you're creating, it's an abomination. We're here to stop it. The leader laughed, the sound sending shivers down my spine. Stop it, foolish child. You can no more stop this than you can stop the turning of the earth or the setting of the sun. This is evolution. This is destiny. As he spoke, tendrils of darkness began to creep towards us. I felt their cold touch on my skin, trying to seep into my very being. "Bjorn," I called out, my voice tight with urgency. "Whatever you're going to do it now." With a cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of the spire, Bjorn unleashed the full power of the Heartstone. Golden light exploded outward, colliding with the swirling vortex of corruption in a spectacular clash of energies. The platform beneath our feet trembled, and I struggled to keep my balance. Through the maelstrom of light and darkness, I saw Bjorn wrestling with the corrupted leader, both of them suspended in the air by the competing energies. "You can't win," the leader snarled, his form shifting and twisting as he fought against Bjorn's power. "The shadow sickness is eternal. It is part of the very fabric of existence." Bjorn's voice, amplified by the power of the Heartstone, rang out in response. "You're wrong. Darkness may be a part of the world, but so is light. So is hope. And as long as there are people willing to fight for what's right, your kind will never win." As they battled, I noticed something strange happening to the vortex of corruption. Where Bjorn's light touched it, the sickly green energy seemed to recoil, revealing glimpses of something else beneath, a pure, radiant energy that felt familiar somehow. Suddenly I understood. "Bjorn!" I shouted over the din of the cosmic struggle. "The corruption, it's not creating energy, it's twisting what's already there. If we can purify it instead of just fighting it, we might be able to stop this at its source." Bjorn's eyes met mine, understanding dawning in their golden depths. With a mighty effort, he broke away from his grapple with the corrupted leader and plunged directly into the heart of the vortex. "No!" the leader howled, lunging after him. But before he could reach Bjorn, I threw myself into his path. We tumbled across the platform, a desperate struggle of flesh against corrupted flesh. "You meddlesome insect!" he spat, his clawed hands closing around my throat. "I'll end you myself." As I fought for breath, spots dancing in my vision, I became aware of a change in the air. The oppressive weight of the corruption was lifting, replaced by a feeling of lightness and warmth. From the heart of the vortex, Bjorn's voice rang out, filled with power and compassion. "Enough. Let the healing begin." A wave of golden energy exploded outward, washing over everything in its path. As it touched me, I felt the corrupted leader's grip loosen, his form beginning to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. "No," he whispered, his voice fading. "It's not possible." And then he was gone, along with the suffocating presence of the shadow sickness. I gasped for air, looking around in wonder as the twisted architecture of the spire began to straighten and heal. At the center of it all stood Bjorn, his body a conduit for an energy that was at once familiar and wholly new. It wasn't just the golden light of the Heartstone anymore. It was as if he had tapped into the very life force of the world itself. "Bjorn?" I called out hesitantly, approaching him. "Are you all right?" He turned to me and I gasped. His eyes were no longer just flecked with gold. They swirled with a rainbow of colors as if containing entire galaxies within them. "I understand now, Freya," he said, his voice resonating with power and wonder. "The shadow sickness, the Heartstone, they're all part of something bigger, a balance that exists in all things." As he spoke, I became aware of changes happening throughout the city. The sickly green glow was fading, replaced by a soft, healing light. I could hear distant sounds of confusion and joy as the corrupted citizens returned to their true selves. "You did it," I breathed, awe and pride swelling in my chest. "You saved them. You saved everyone." Bjorn shook his head, a warm smile spreading across his face. "No, Freya. We did it. I couldn't have gotten here without you. Your strength, your compassion, your unwavering belief in doing what's right. That's what gave me the power to heal, instead of just destroy." Before I could respond, a tremor ran through the building. Cracks began to appear in the walls and floor as the twisted structure, no longer sustained by corrupt energies, started to collapse. "We need to get out of here," I said urgently, grabbing Bjorn's hand. He nodded, and with a thought, the strange energy surrounding him enveloped us both. I felt a sensation of weightlessness, and suddenly we were outside, watching as the spire crumbled in on itself. As the dust settled, we found ourselves surrounded by the citizens of the city, no longer corrupted but dazed and confused like people waking from a long nightmare. Aldrich pushed his way through the crowd, his eyes wide with disbelief. It's over? Truly over? Bjorn nodded, the cosmic light in his eyes dimming slightly as he addressed the gathered people. The shadow sickness has been purged from your city, but the healing is just beginning. There's much work to be done to rebuild not just your homes, but your trust in each other and in yourselves. A murmur ran through the crowd. Relief, joy, and not a small amount of shame and regret for the actions taken under the influence of the corruption. We'll do whatever it takes, Aldrich said firmly. We let our pride and ambition blind us once before. It won't happen again. As the citizens began to disperse, already beginning the work of reclaiming their city, I turned to Bjorn. So what now? That energy you tapped into, it changed you, didn't it? Bjorn looked down at his hands, which still shimmered with traces of that multifaceted light. Yes, he said softly. I can feel it, Freya. The shadow sickness may be gone from this city, but it still exists in the world. And there are other forces out there, other imbalances that need to be addressed. I felt a mixture of pride and sadness well up inside me. You're not coming back to Iron Peak, are you? He met my gaze, his newfound cosmic eyes soft with affection. No, I'm not. This power, this understanding, it comes with a responsibility. I have to go where I'm needed, try to maintain the balance and heal the wounds in the world. I nodded, fighting back tears. I understand. You have a greater destiny now. Bjorn reached out, taking my hands in his. Come with me, he said, his voice urgent. Freya, I meant what I said before. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Your skills as a healer, your wisdom and compassion, the world needs that just as much as it needs this new power I found. I hesitated, thinking of Iron Peak, of the life I had known. But as I looked into Bjorn's eyes, seeing the vastness of the universe reflected there, I felt a surge of excitement and purpose. Yes, I said, a smile spreading across my face. Yes, I'll come with you. Whatever this new journey brings, we'll face it together. As the sun began to rise over the healing city, Bjorn and I stood hand in hand, ready to embark on a new adventure. The shadow sickness had been defeated, but we both knew that our work was far from over. There would be other challenges, other imbalances to correct, other wounds to heal. But in that moment, watching the dawn of a new day break over a city reborn, I felt a profound sense of hope. Whatever the future held, we would face it together, bringing light to the darkness and healing to a world in need. The end of the shadow sickness was not an ending at all, but a beginning, the start of a grand new journey that would take us to the very edges of the world and beyond. And I, for one, couldn't wait to see where it would lead us. The first thing I became aware of was the pounding in my head, a relentless drumbeat that seemed to echo through my entire body. Slowly, painfully, I opened my eyes, wincing at the harsh light that streamed through a nearby window. As my vision cleared, I realized I was in my own bed, the familiar scent of herbs and incense filling the air. "She's awake," a voice called out, and suddenly there was a flurry of activity around me. I tried to sit up, but a firm hand gently pushed me back down. "Easy there, Freya," came the gruff voice of Gunnar, our village healer. "You've been through quite an ordeal." "Rurik," I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. "Is he?" Gunnar's weathered face broke into a rare smile. "Alive and recovering thanks to you. You did it, Freya. You saved him, and half the village besides." Relief washed over me like a wave, and I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. But before I could fully process the news, the door to my hut burst open, and in strode Rurik himself, looking pale but very much alive. "Freya," he boomed, his voice as commanding as ever despite his weakened state. "By the gods, it's good to see you awake." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and clasped my hand in both of his. "I owe you my life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We all do." I managed a weak smile. "I'm just glad you're all right, my king." Rurik shook his head. "No, not just your king. Your friend, Freya. What you've done, there are no words." As the initial shock of seeing Rurik alive and well began to fade, questions started flooding my mind. How long was I unconscious? What happened after I gave you the antidote? The traitor. "Peace, Freya," Rurik said, holding up a hand. "You've been out for nearly a week. The poison took a heavy toll on you, but Gunnar here worked day and night to pull you through." Gunnar harumphed modestly. "I merely followed your notes, Freya. The antidote you created saved us all." As for what happened after, Rurik continued, his expression darkening. "That's a tale best told when you're stronger. But know this, the traitor has been caught and awaits judgment." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and dread. Part of me wanted to know immediately, but I could feel exhaustion tugging at me again. "Rest now," Rurik said, squeezing my hand once more before standing. "We'll talk more when you've regained your strength." As they left, I drifted back into a fitful sleep, my dreams filled with swirling mists and whispered secrets. The next few days passed in a blur of sleep and brief periods of wakefulness. Gradually, I felt my strength returning, and with it came an insatiable curiosity about what had transpired while I was unconscious. On the 5th day after I'd first awoken, I finally felt strong enough to leave my bed. I dressed slowly, my muscles protesting after so much inactivity. As I stepped outside, I was struck by how normal everything seemed. Villagers went about their daily tasks, children played in the streets, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted from the bakery. But as I made my way through the village, I noticed the stares and whispers that followed me. Some looked at me with awe and gratitude, while others eyed me warily, fear evident in their expressions. "It's her, the one who saved the king. Did you hear? They say she made a deal with a witch. Hush, don't speak ill of her. Without her, we'd all be dead." I quickened my pace, heading towards the great hall where I knew Rurik would be holding court. As I approached, I saw Bjorn, Rurik's son, standing guard at the entrance. His face was a mask of conflicting emotions as he saw me approach. "Freya," he said stiffly, nodding in acknowledgement. I owe you an apology. My actions during the crisis were regrettable." I studied him for a moment, remembering our fierce battle when he had accused me of being the poisoner. "You were afraid and trying to protect your father," I said finally. "I understand that. But next time, perhaps trust that we're on the same side?" Bjorn nodded, looking relieved. "You have my word. And thank you for everything." I gave him a small smile and entered the hall. Inside, Rurik was deep in conversation with his advisors, but he broke off as soon as he saw me. "Freya," he called out, gesturing for me to join them. "Come, we have much to discuss." As I approached, I could feel the weight of everyone's stares. Rurik dismissed his other advisors, leaving just the 2 of us. "How are you feeling?" he asked as I sat down. "Better," I replied, but confused. "Rurik, what happened while I was unconscious? Who was the traitor? And why do some of the villagers look at me like I'm some kind of witch?" Rurik sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 50-odd years. "It's a tangled web, Freya. After you collapsed, chaos erupted. The antidote worked. Those of us who were poisoned began to recover. But then accusations started flying about how the poisoning had happened in the first place." He paused, taking a long drink from his tankard before continuing. "It was Eric, Freya. Eric was the traitor." I felt as if I'd been struck. Eric, Rurik's most trusted advisor and my mentor since childhood. "But why?" I whispered. "Power," Rurik spat. What else? He thought with me out of the way and Bjorn too young and inexperienced, he could seize control. He never expected you to find a cure. I shook my head, still struggling to process this betrayal. How did you find out? He got careless, Rurik explained. In the confusion after you collapsed, he tried to destroy your notes and remaining antidote. Bjorn caught him in the act. A chill ran down my spine as I realized how close we'd come to losing everything. What will happen to him? Rurik's face hardened. He'll face the judgment of our people. The penalty for treason is death, Freya. You know this. I nodded numbly. Despite Eric's betrayal, the thought of his execution filled me with sadness. He had been like a father to me for so many years. There's more, Rurik continued. Word of your methods in finding the cure have spread. I tensed. You mean my deal with the witch? The vision quest with the poison? Rurik nodded gravely. Some see you as a hero, blessed by the gods. Others, they whisper that you've dabbled in dark magic, that you're somehow tainted. I felt a flare of anger. I did what I had to do to save lives. I know, Freya, I know. Rurik placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. And that's why I've made a decision. I want you to be my official advisor, taking Eric's place. I stared at him in shock. Me? But the people? The people will learn to trust you again, Rurik said firmly. You've more than proven your loyalty and your worth. Besides, he added with a wry smile, I need someone with your wits and courage by my side, especially now. Before I could respond, the door burst open, and a breathless guard rushed in. My king, Eric. He's escaped. Rurik leapt to his feet, all traces of weariness gone. Sound the alarm. I want every available warrior searching. He cannot be allowed to leave Iron Peak. As the guard rushed off, Rurik turned to me, his eyes blazing. Freya, I hate to ask this of you so soon, but I'm with you, I said, standing up. Let's find him. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. The entire village was in an uproar as search parties combed every inch of Iron Peak. I found myself in the thick of it, my recent brush with death all but forgotten in the urgency of the moment. As darkness fell, I made my way to the edge of the village, a nagging suspicion growing in my mind. Sure enough, as I approached the tree line of the dark forest, I caught a glimpse of a figure slipping between the trees. Eric! I called out, my voice echoing in the gathering gloom. Stop! The figure froze, then slowly turned. Eric's once proud face was haggard, his eyes wild with fear and desperation. Freya, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I should have known you'd be the one to find me. I approached cautiously, my hand on the knife at my belt. Why, Eric? After everything we've been through, why betray us like this? Eric laughed bitterly. You wouldn't understand, girl. You, with your talent and your favor. Do you know what it's like to serve faithfully for decades, only to be constantly overlooked? To watch younger, less experienced people rise above you? So you decided to murder Rurik? To poison innocent people? I shot back, anger rising in me. I did what I had to do, Eric snarled. Rurik is weak. Iron Peak needs strong leadership to survive what's coming. I frowned. What's coming? What are you talking about? Eric's face twisted into a mirthless smile. Oh, you'll see soon enough. The storm that's gathering. Iron Peak will be torn apart if it's not prepared. Then help us prepare, I pleaded. Come back with me. Tell Rurik what you know. It's not too late to make this right. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of the old Eirik in his eyes, the man who had taught me so much, who had been like family. But then his expression hardened. No, he said coldly. I've come too far to turn back now. I'm sorry, Freya. I truly am. Before I could react, he pulled a small vial from his cloak and raised it to his lips. Eric, no. I lunged forward, but I was too late. He swallowed the contents in one gulp, then looked at me with a mixture of sadness and defiance. Remember what I said, Freya. The storm is coming. Prepare Iron Peak, if you can. I caught him as he fell, lowering him gently to the ground. His body convulsed once, twice, and then he was still. His sightless eyes, staring up at the stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. I don't know how long I sat there, cradling the body of the man who had been both mentor and traitor. Eventually, I heard the sound of approaching footsteps. "Freya?" Bjorn's voice called out. "Are you—" He broke off as he saw the scene before him. "By the gods, is that—" I nodded, my voice hoarse. "It's done. He took his own life rather than face judgment." Bjorn knelt beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Freya. I know he meant a lot to you, despite everything." Together we carried Eric's body back to the village. The news of his death spread quickly, and I could see the mixture of relief and lingering fear on the faces of the villagers as we passed. Rurik was waiting for us in the great hall, his face grave as we relayed what had happened. When I told him of Eric's cryptic warning about a coming storm, his brow furrowed with concern. "What do you think he meant?" I asked. Rurik shook his head. "I don't know. But if Eric thought it was dire enough to betray everything he once held dear, we must take it seriously." He stood addressing the gathered crowd. "People of Iron Peak, today marks the end of a dark chapter in our history. But we must not let our guard down. Eric's treachery has been dealt with, but his final words suggest that greater challenges lie ahead." The hall filled with murmurs of concern and speculation. Rurik raised his hand for silence. "In light of these events and in recognition of her invaluable service to our people, I am naming Freya as my chief advisor, effective immediately." The announcement was met with a mixture of cheers and uneasy whispers. I felt a weight settle onto my shoulders heavier than any physical burden I'd ever carried. Rurik turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you ready for this, Freya? The road ahead will not be easy." I took a deep breath, thinking of everything that had led to this moment. The poisoning, the desperate quest for a cure, the battles both physical and psychological I'd had to fight. I thought of Eric's final warning and the unknown threats that loomed on the horizon. "I'm ready," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Whatever storms are coming, we'll face them together. For Iron Peak." Rurik nodded approvingly. "For Iron Peak," he echoed, raising his tankard in a toast. As the rest of the hall joined in the cheer, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was, as I had thought earlier, just the beginning. The poison plot had been foiled, the traitor dealt with, but Eric's ominous words hung over us like a gathering storm cloud. I gazed out the window at the dark forest that bordered our village, its secrets and dangers now seeming more threatening than ever. Whatever was coming, I silently vowed, I would do everything in my power to protect Iron Peak and its people. The challenges ahead would test us all, but we would face them as we always had, with courage, unity, and the unwavering spirit that had seen us through countless hardships before. As the festivities wound down and people began to disperse, Rurik pulled me aside. "Get some rest, Freya," he said softly. "Tomorrow, we begin preparing for whatever lies ahead." I nodded, feeling the exhaustion of the day's events finally catching up with me. As I made my way back to my hut, I could feel the eyes of the villagers upon me, some filled with admiration, others with lingering suspicion. I knew it would take time to fully regain their trust, to prove that my actions had been necessary and not born of some dark magic. But as I settled into bed that night, my mind racing with thoughts of what the future might hold, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had survived this crisis, emerging stronger and more united. Whatever storms were gathering on the horizon, Iron Peak would weather them. And I would be there, standing alongside Rurik and our people, ready to face whatever challenges came our way. As I drifted off to sleep, my last conscious thought was of the endless possibilities that lay before us, a future uncertain, yet full of potential. The next chapter of our story was about to begin, and I, for one, was ready to face it head-on.